The nanoforge hummed softly under Election's calloused fingers as he coaxed streams of crystalline particles into a delicate, intricate pattern. Outside his workshop, the eternal twilight of Fralice cast long, deep blue shadows across the translucent ice walls. But inside, the soft glow of his work bathed everything in an ethereal, azure light. He carefully adjusted the molecular stabilizers, his practiced precision ensuring the weapon core began to crystallize perfectly. This piece was different, it was not just another pretty bauble for some off-world collector. It was art born of necessity, a stark reminder of why he had chosen exile on this frozen world. The security sensors chimed, jolting him from his concentration. Election's eyes flicked to the monitoring panel. Something substantial had breached the outer perimeter, triggering the thermal alarms. He cursed under his breath, carefully setting down his tools. Display external feeds, he commanded, and the holographic interface shimmered to life. Multiple angles of the barren ice fields surrounding his compound appeared. At first, he saw only the familiar whiteout conditions of a frost storm, but then, movement. A figure, stumbling through the driving snow. Election zoomed in, his brow furrowing. The figure's skin seemed to glow with a faint, purple luminescence, visible even through the storm. Not human, not any species he recognized. Computer, analyze life signs. Subject exhibits severe hypothermia, cellular degradation imminent. Estimated survival time without intervention, 12 minutes. Election's jaw clenched. He'd sworn never to involve himself in others' troubles again, not after what happened to his family. But watching someone freeze to death outside his door, damn it all. Activate emergency protocols. Prep the medical bay. He pulled on his thermal coat and headed for the airlock. The moment he stepped outside, the bitter wind lashed at him like 1,000 icy knives. Even with his enhanced cold resistance, Freyla's storms were brutal. He activated his helmet's thermal imaging and spotted the figure, now collapsed in the snow about 50 meters away. Election trudged through the deep drifts, the wind howling around him. As he got closer, he could see the alien more clearly. Definitely female, with violet skin that seemed to pulse with a weak bioluminescence. Her clothing was torn and frozen, and what looked like burn marks marred one side of her body. He reached down to check her pulse, finding it thready but present. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that glowed with an inner light. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "They're coming." "Who's coming?" Election demanded, but she had already lost consciousness. Cursing again, he scooped her up in his arms. She was surprisingly light, her skin ice-cold against his chest, even through his protective gear. As he turned back toward his shelter, something caught his eye, a faint shimmer in the storm, like heat distortion in the air. His tactical instincts, honed by years of warfare, screamed danger. He quickened his pace, trying to maintain his footing in the deep snow. The security feeds had shown nothing else out there, but something about this felt wrong. The woman's wounds weren't just from the cold, she'd been in a fight, and recently. They reached the airlock just as his sensors picked up multiple incoming signatures at the edge of their range. The door sealed behind them with a reassuring hiss as the decontamination cycle began. Computer, full lockdown. Activate all defensive systems. Acknowledged. Warning, multiple unidentified vessels detected in high orbit. Election looked down at the unconscious woman in his arms, her purple skin now barely glowing. "What have you gotten me into?" he murmured. He carried her to the medical bay, laying her gently on the examination table. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Her features were delicate but strong, and an intricate pattern swirled across her violet skin, like star maps. But she was dying, her core temperature dangerously low. Computer, full bioscan. The medical scanners hummed to life, bathing her in soft light. Subject exhibits severe hypothermia and multiple plasma burns. Internal bleeding detected. Genetic structure unknown. No match in database. Election began removing her frozen outer garments, trying to access the wounds beneath. Begin emergency warming protocols. Prepare synthetic plasma for transfusion. As he worked, his trained eye noted details that raised even more questions. Her clothing, though damaged, was clearly military grade. The burns weren't random, they formed distinct patterns consistent with close-range energy weapon fire. Someone had been trying to kill her. Her eyes snapped open suddenly, glowing with panic. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. The crystal, she gasped. Is it safe? Easy, Election said firmly, trying to keep her still. You're safe here. I'm trying to help you. She searched his face intently, her luminescent eyes seeming to peer into his soul. I'm Ka, she managed, her voice weak but musical. You have to hide it. Hide what? The crystal, but she had passed out again, her grip going slack. The monitor showed her vitals stabilizing, but barely. Whatever she was running from, whatever she was trying to protect, it would have to wait. Election continued treating her injuries, his movements precise and efficient. As he worked, his security systems continued reporting the orbital vessels moving into position above them. He needed answers, but first, he needed her alive to give them. Hours passed as he stabilized her condition. The wounds began to heal under regenerative treatment, her natural bioluminescence growing stronger. He found himself studying her face, noting how her expression shifted even in unconsciousness. There was something compelling about her, beyond just her exotic beauty. Unidentified vessels have entered low orbit, the computer announced. Energy signatures consistent with military craft. Election moved to his command console, bringing up the tactical display. 3 ships, definitely military, definitely not local. Their sensor patterns suggested they were scanning the surface, looking for someone, looking for her. He glanced back at Ka's sleeping form. His isolation here had been carefully cultivated, a shield against past pain. Getting involved in whatever conflict she was fleeing could shatter that peace forever. But as he watched her chest rise and fall, saw the way her skin shimmered with returning life, he knew it was already too late. He was involved now, whether he liked it or not. A soft moan drew his attention back to the medical bay. Ka was stirring, her eyes fluttering open. This time, they were clearer, more focused. Where, she started to ask. You're in my workshop, on Fralis, he told her. I found you in the storm. You're safe, for now. But there are ships in orbit, looking for something or someone. She tried to sit up, wincing. How long was I unconscious? About 4 hours. Long enough for whoever's after you to track you here. He crossed his arms. I think it's time you told me what kind of trouble I've inherited. Ka's luminescent eyes darted to the tactical display, then back to him. She moved with careful grace, despite her injuries, swinging her legs off the medical bed. Your Election, she said. The Cryoforge Master. I recognized your work when I was scanning for shelter. A slight smile curved her lips. Your reputation reaches far beyond this frozen world. And you're deflecting, he replied flatly. There are 3 warships up there, and you've got plasma burns that aren't even in my medical database. Start talking. She stood, testing her balance. The medical gown did little to hide her athletic figure, but Election kept his eyes locked on hers. After a moment, she reached into a hidden pocket in her torn uniform and withdrew something that made his breath catch. It was a crystal, about the size of his palm, but it seemed to contain galaxies. As she held it, warm light pulsed from within, and the temperature in the room noticeably rose. The soul crystal, she said softly. My people's greatest treasure, and greatest burden. It contains the power to generate endless thermal energy, to warm entire worlds. Her expression hardened. Lorden wants it. To power his weapons, to turn its life-giving heat into something that brings only death. Election's mind raced with the implications. Lorden, the same tyrant who's been conquering the outer systems. The same she hesitated, then continued, he's dying. Some rare condition that makes him unable to generate body heat. He believes the crystal can cure him, but using it that way would destroy its essence. My people have protected it for millennia, passing it from guardian to guardian. I'm the last. The security system chimed again, warning, ships deploying atmospheric craft. Estimated arrival of search parties, 15 minutes. Election ran a hand through his close-cropped hair. They'll have thermal scanners. This place is shielded, but that crystal, its energy signature must be visible for miles. I can dampen its output, but not for long. Kaa stepped closer to him, her skin glowing more intensely. I know I have no right to ask for your help, but if Lorden gets this crystal, countless worlds will suffer. He turned away, moving to check his security feeds. I don't take sides anymore, not after. The memories threatened to surface, his family, the war, the choices that haunted him. He pushed them back down. Sometimes, not taking sides is taking a side, Kaa said quietly. She touched his arm, and he felt warmth spread from the contact. I've seen your work, Election. You create beauty from the cold itself. Will you really stand by and watch that beauty burn? Before he could answer, alarms blared, multiple breaches detected in outer perimeter. Armed forces approaching from 3 vectors. Election sprang into action, muscle memory taking over. Computer, activate defense protocol Sigma. Get to the safe room, he told Kaa. 3rd door on the left. Palm print will let you in. I can fight, she protested. You can barely stand. Go. He was already moving to his weapons locker, pulling out a cryo-rifle of his own design. I'll hold them off. She caught his arm again. Election, thank you. Then she was gone, running toward the safe room with surprising speed, despite her injuries. He checked his tactical display one last time. At least 12 heavily armed troops approaching through the storm. They'd found them faster than he'd expected. So much for staying uninvolved, he muttered, charging his rifle. The familiar hum of its cryocore was oddly comforting. Time to show these invaders why even Lorden's forces feared the master of the frozen forge. Fralice, a frozen cesspool at the galaxy's edge, Lorden rasped, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. He clutched the thermal regulator embedded in his chest, the device struggling to maintain his core temperature above critical levels. The bridge of his flagship, the Ascendancy, was opulent, decorated with trophies from countless conquered worlds, yet the cold seemed to seep into every corner, mirroring the chill in his bones. Before him, the holographic display showed the burning ruins of Election's workshop and the 2 figures fleeing into the blizzard. The crystal is within reach, my lord, Commander Theron reported, his voice devoid of emotion. Theron was a study in contrasts, tall and imposing, with cybernetic enhancements that replaced lost limbs from battles past, but utterly devoted to Lorden's will. The atmospheric craft have deployed search parties. They will not escape. Lorden's skeletal fingers tightened on the regulator. Escape is irrelevant. I want the crystal, and I want the alien. Alive. She knows how to unlock its full potential, and I will not have it damaged by incompetent fools. His gaze turned icy, and the temperature in the bridge seemed to drop even further. Theron, I am entrusting this to you personally. Retrieve the crystal, and bring the alien to me. Spare no expense. As you command, my lord. Theron bowed stiffly and turned to address the bridge crew. Increase deployment of thermal scanners. Focus on grid sectors 4 through 7. Activate hunter-killer drones. No mercy. As Theron issued orders, Lorden turned away, his attention drawn to a private display showing a live feed from the medical bay. There, various specialists were tending to his failing body, injecting him with experimental serums and performing intricate procedures with nanobots. All futile, he knew. The necrosis was spreading, slowly shutting down his systems. The crystal was his only hope. Flashback sequence. Lorden's memories flickered, taking him back to a different life, a life before the cold consumed him. He saw himself as a young officer, ambitious and ruthless, rising through the ranks of a dying republic's military. The galaxy was in chaos, fractured by endless wars between petty warlords and corrupt corporations. He was determined to bring order, to forge a new empire from the ashes of the old. He remembered the day he discovered the ancient texts, the prophecies of a crystal capable of generating limitless energy. He saw it as the key to his ambitions, a way to unite the galaxy under his rule. He launched expeditions, plundering lost worlds and ancient temples, all in search of the crystal. But the search came at a cost. He faced rebellions, betrayals, and unimaginable horrors. He made alliances with dark forces, sacrificing his own humanity in the pursuit of power. And then, the disease struck, a rare genetic anomaly that slowly drained the heat from his body. The very power he sought to control turned against him. End flashback. Lorden returned to the present with a jolt, gasping for breath. The pain was constant, a burning cold that never abated. He needed the crystal, not just for power, but for survival. Back on Fralice, Election and Ka struggled through the blizzard, the wind tearing at their clothes. Election's shoulder throbbed with each step, but he pushed himself forward, driven by the need to protect Ka and the crystal. They reached the backup shelter, a small, utilitarian structure built into the side of a glacier. Election punched in the security code, and the door slid open with a groan. The shelter was basic, but it offered warmth and protection. A small generator hummed in a corner, providing power for a heating unit in a rudimentary medical bay. Election collapsed onto a cot, his strength failing him. "Let me see your shoulder," Ka said, her voice firm. She examined the burn, her luminescent eyes glowing with concern. "That's a plasma wound. I can treat it with the crystal, but it will drain its energy." "Do it," Election said, gritting his teeth. "I won't be much use to you if I'm bleeding out." Ka nodded and carefully placed the crystal over the wound. Warm light pulsed from its depths, and Election felt a surge of energy flowing through him. The pain subsided, and the burn began to heal. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need a plan," Ka said. "They will be searching for us. This shelter won't hold them for long." Election sat up, his mind racing. "There's an old mining facility about 50 kilometers north of here. It's abandoned, but it has underground tunnels that might provide cover. Can we reach it?" Ka asked. "We have to." "But the crystal?" Election hesitated. "It's too dangerous to carry. They'll be scanning for its energy signature." Ka looked at the crystal, her expression troubled. "I can't leave it behind. It's too important." Election thought for a moment. "I have an idea. There's a lead-lined vault in the mining facility. It was used to store radioactive materials. It should block the crystal's energy signature." "It might work," Ka said. "But what about Lorden's forces? They will not give up easily." "We'll have to fight," Election said, his eyes hardening. "I know this planet better than they do. I can set traps, use the environment to our advantage." Ka nodded, her gaze locking with his. "Then let's go." They gathered their supplies and prepared to leave the shelter. As they stepped outside into the blizzard, Election felt a sense of determination rising within him. He was no longer just a reclusive artisan, hiding from the world. He was a protector, a warrior, and he would do whatever it took to keep Ka and the crystal safe. Back on the Ascendancy, Lorden watched the progress of the search with growing impatience. The hunter-killer drones had detected faint energy signatures in the vicinity of the backup shelter, but the figures had already fled. Theron reported that search parties were closing in on the mining facility, but Lorden sensed that they were losing time. "Increase the pressure," he commanded. "Deploy the thermal hounds. They will track the alien scent, no matter how faint." Theron hesitated. "My lord, the thermal hounds are unpredictable. They have been known to turn on their handlers." "I do not care," Lorden snapped. "I want the crystal, and I want it now. Unleash the hounds." Theron bowed his head. "As you command, my lord." As the thermal hounds were deployed, Election and Kaa made their way towards the mining facility, their journey fraught with peril. They were hunted, wounded, and exhausted, but they pressed on, driven by hope and a shared determination to protect the crystal from falling into the wrong hands. The fate of the galaxy may depend on their success. Her skin shimmered, her luminescent violet intensifying against the darkening sky. "Lorden," she called out, her voice carrying on the wind, amplified by an unknown ability. "I know you can hear me. Take me, but leave him alone. He has nothing to do with this." The descending ship paused, hovering above them. A beam of intense light enveloped Kaa, lifting her off the ground. Election tried to reach her, but the beam was too powerful, holding her suspended in midair. "A noble gesture, Guardian," a voice echoed from the ship, laced with cold amusement. "But I need the crystal as well. You're both coming with me." The beam intensified, pulling Kaa towards the ship. Election stumbled forward, firing his cryo rifle, but the shots dissipated against the energy field. He was helpless, watching as she was drawn into the belly of the behemoth. "Election, run," she shouted, her voice fading as the ship ascended. "Save the crystal." Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness within the warship. The ship turned, its engines roaring, and vanished into the storm. Election stood alone in the snow, clutching the soul crystal. Rage and despair warred within him. He had failed to protect her. His home was destroyed. And now, he was hunted by a ruthless tyrant who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. He looked down at the crystal in his hands, its warmth a small comfort in the bitter cold. Kaa had entrusted it to him, and he couldn't let her down. He had to find a way to stop Lorden, to rescue her, and to protect the crystal from falling into the wrong hands. He activated his comm unit, trying to reach any allied forces, any sign of help. But all he heard was static. Lorden's forces had jammed all communications in the sector. He was alone. He remembered the backup shelter, the one Kaa had mentioned just before the ship had appeared. It was a long shot, but it was his only hope. He had to get to the shelter, regroup, and plan his next move. With renewed determination, he began to trudge through the snow, his injured shoulder throbbing with each step. The storm raged around him, testing his strength and his resolve. He thought of Kaa, her violet skin shimmering in the light, her unwavering commitment to protecting the crystal. He couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. Flashback sequence, elections past. His mind drifted back to another time, another war, another loss. He saw himself as a young soldier, fighting for a republic that had long since crumbled. He remembered the faces of his comrades, their hopes and dreams shattered by the brutal realities of war. He saw his wife, Anya, her smile as warm as the summer sun. They had met on the battlefield, two souls drawn together by the shared experience of loss and trauma. They had found solace in each other's arms, promising to build a better future, a future free from war and suffering. But their dreams were short-lived. Anya had been killed in a surprise attack, a senseless act of violence that had shattered Election's world. He had blamed himself for her death, convinced that he could have done more to protect her. The pain of her loss had driven him to the edge of madness. He had abandoned his post, deserting the war and fleeing to the remote planet of Fralis. He had sought solace in isolation, building his workshop and dedicating himself to his craft. But the past had a way of catching up with him. Lorden's arrival on Fralice had forced him to confront his demons, to face the consequences of his past actions. He could no longer hide from the world. He had to fight, not just for Ka and the crystal, but for the memory of Anya, for the hope of a better future. End flashback. The memory of Anya fueled his determination, pushing him forward through the storm. He finally reached the backup shelter, collapsing inside with exhaustion. The shelter was small and basic, but it offered warmth and protection from the elements. He activated the emergency beacon, hoping against hope that someone would respond. He then began to treat his injuries, tending to the burn on his shoulder and wrapping it tightly with a thermal bandage. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He scanned the surrounding ice fields with his thermal sensors, but he detected nothing. It was as if the very planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. He knew that Lorden would be searching for him. The tyrant wouldn't rest until he had the crystal in his grasp. Election had to be prepared. He had to use all his skills and knowledge to defend himself and the crystal from Lorden's forces. He checked his weapons, ensuring that his cryo-rifle was fully charged and ready to fire. He then began to set traps around the shelter, using his cryotechnology to create icy barriers and hidden pitfalls. He knew that he was outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. But he refused to give up. He would fight to the death to protect Ka and the crystal, to honor the memory of Anya, and to secure a better future for the galaxy. As the storm raged outside, Election stood ready, the soul crystal clutched tightly in his hand. He was the master of the frozen forge, and he would not be broken. On board the Ascendancy, Ka was brought before Lorden. He sat on his frozen throne, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes burning with cold intensity. "Welcome, Guardian," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the hum of the ship's engines. "I have been expecting you." Ka stood tall, her violet skin shimmering with defiance. "You will not get the crystal, Lorden. I will die before I let it fall into your hands." Lorden smiled, a cruel and chilling expression. "You misunderstand, Guardian. I don't need your permission. I will take what is mine." He gestured to a nearby console. "Bring her to the extraction chamber." Two cyborg guards seized Ka, dragging her towards a darkened corridor. She struggled against them, but their grip was too strong. "What are you going to do to me?" she demanded. Lorden chuckled. "I am merely going to unlock the crystal's full potential. And you, Guardian, will be the key." As Ka was dragged away, she knew that she was facing a fate worse than death. Lorden intended to use her, to exploit her connection to the crystal, to drain its power for his own selfish purposes. She had to find a way to escape, to warn Election, and to stop Lorden before it was too late. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. Election, stunned by Ka's sacrifice, barely registered the crystal being thrust into his hands. He watched as she ascended towards the menacing warship, a beacon of violet light against the icy landscape. The ship's tractor beam intensified, pulling her swiftly upwards, her form becoming smaller and smaller until she vanished within its dark hull. "Ka!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind. He felt a surge of helplessness, a familiar ache from a past he had tried so hard to bury. He looked down at the soul crystal, its warmth radiating against his frozen skin. It pulsed with a gentle light, a silent promise, a reminder of the immense power it held. He had to protect it, not just for Ka, but for the countless worlds that would suffer if it fell into Lorden's grasp. He stumbled forward, his shoulder throbbing with pain, his vision blurring from exhaustion. He needed to reach the backup shelter, to regroup and plan his next move. But the storm was relentless, and Lorden's forces were undoubtedly searching for him. He glanced back at the burning ruins of his workshop, his sanctuary reduced to a smoldering wreck. He felt a pang of grief, but there was no time to mourn. Survival demanded action. He activated his comm unit, attempting to contact any potential allies. But the signal was dead, blocked by Lorden's jamming technology. He was alone, stranded on a frozen wasteland, hunted by a ruthless tyrant. He pressed on, driven by a desperate hope and a fierce determination. He navigated through the blizzard, relying on his knowledge of the terrain, his senses heightened by adrenaline. He imagined Ka, held captive on the warship, facing Lordan's wrath. He couldn't abandon her. He had to find a way to rescue her and reclaim the crystal. Hours passed, each one a test of endurance. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the cold seeped into his bones, numbing his limbs. He began to hallucinate, seeing visions of Anya, her face shimmering in the snow, urging him to fight. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He couldn't afford to succumb to despair. Finally, through the swirling snow, he saw it, the faint outline of the backup shelter, a small, unassuming structure built into the side of a glacier. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding with relief. He reached the shelter and stumbled inside, collapsing against the freezing wall. He sealed the door behind him, activating the internal heating system. The small space slowly began to warm, chasing away the biting cold. He caught his breath, surveying the meager supplies. A few rations, some medical equipment, a basic communications console, and a cryo-rifle rack. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive. He tended to his wounds, cleaning the plasma burn on his shoulder and applying a regenerative patch. He then checked the security systems, activating the perimeter sensors and calibrating the defense turrets. He knew it wouldn't be enough to stop a full-scale assault, but it might buy him some time. As he worked, his thoughts returned to Ka. He imagined her strength, her resilience, her unwavering dedication to protecting the soul crystal. He wondered if she was still alive, if she was resisting Lordan's interrogation. He clenched his fists, a surge of anger coursing through him. He wouldn't let Lordan break her. He activated the communications console, hoping to bypass Lordan's jamming field. He adjusted the frequency, fine-tuning the signal, searching for any sign of life. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he heard a faint voice, crackling through the static. "This is Lieutenant Zara of the Fralian Resistance, requesting assistance. Lordan's forces, mining facility." Election's heart leaped. Resistance fighters. He wasn't alone after all. "Lieutenant Zara, this is Election. I'm at the backup shelter. I have the soul crystal. Can you hear me?" The static cleared slightly, and Zara's voice became clearer. "Election. We thought you were dead. We've been tracking Lordan's forces. They're heading towards the mining facility. We believe they're searching for something there." "I know what they're searching for," Election replied. "I need your help. I need to rescue Ka and protect the crystal." Zara hesitated. "It's a suicide mission, Election. Lordan's forces are overwhelming. We're barely holding our own." "I know the risks," Election said. "But I can't stand by and do nothing. Ka sacrificed herself to protect the crystal. I won't let her sacrifice be in vain." Zara was silent for a moment. Then, she spoke, her voice filled with determination. "All right, Election. We're with you. We'll meet you at the mining facility. But be warned, it's a trap. Lordan's expecting you." "I'm counting on it," Election said, a grim smile spreading across his face. He gathered his weapons, strapping the cryo-rifle to his back and securing the soul crystal in a thermal-shielded container. He activated the shelter's self-destruct sequence, ensuring that Lordan's forces wouldn't gain any valuable intelligence. He stepped out into the storm, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He was heading into a battle he might not survive, but he was no longer fighting alone. He had allies, resistance fighters who were willing to risk their lives for freedom. And he had Ka, her spirit guiding him, her sacrifice fueling his determination. As he trudged through the snow towards the mining facility, he knew that the fate of Fralis, perhaps even the galaxy, rested on his shoulders. He was the master of the frozen forge, and he would not be broken. He would fight for Ka, for the crystal, and for a future free from Lordan's tyranny. Meanwhile, on board the Ascendancy, Ka was brought before Lordan, who was strapped into an imposing chair fitted with various tubes and wires. He looked frail, his skin gaunt, his eyes gleaming with a feverish intensity. "Welcome, Guardian," Lordan rasped, his voice weak but laced with malice. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Ka stared back at him, unflinching. "You will never control the soul crystal, Lordan. Its power will reject you." Lordan chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Such naive faith. Power is power, Guardian. It can be wielded by anyone with the will to control it." "The crystal is not a weapon," Ka retorted. "It is a source of life, of healing, of growth. You would corrupt it, twist it into something evil." "I am merely adapting it to my needs," Lordan said. "I am saving myself, saving the galaxy from chaos." "You are a tyrant," Ka spat. "You seek only power and control." Lordan's eyes narrowed. "Enough. Prepare her for the extraction process. I grow weary of these childish games." Cyborg guards seized Ka, strapping her into a similar chair next to Lordan's. She struggled against them, but their strength was overwhelming. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I am merely borrowing your connection to the crystal," Lordan said. "I need your essence, your knowledge, to unlock its full potential." "You can't do this." Ka cried out. "You will destroy yourself." Lordan ignored her pleas. Technicians began to connect tubes and wires to her body, draining her energy, feeding it into Lordan's failing form. She felt her strength fading, her connection to the crystal weakening. She knew that if she didn't find a way to escape, Lordan would drain her completely, leaving her a lifeless husk. And with her gone, the soul crystal would fall into his clutches, its power unleashed upon the galaxy. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, reaching out to Election, hoping that he was still alive, that he would find a way to stop Lordan before it was too late. The Ascendancy shuddered as Election, guided by Zara and her resistance fighters, launched a desperate assault on the ship's primary thermal regulator. They had managed to sneak aboard using a stolen access code and a daring spacewalk during a meteor shower, a gamble that paid off but left them exposed to the ship's internal defenses. Inside, chaos reigned. Zara's team, though small, fought with the ferocity of those defending their home. They used the Ascendancy's own network against itself, rerouting power, disabling security systems, and creating diversions. But they were outnumbered, and Lordan's forces were closing in. Election, his shoulder still throbbing, moved through the ship's corridors with grim determination. He was focused on one thing, rescuing Ka and confronting Lordan. He followed the faint energy signature of the soul crystal, using his cryosense to navigate the labyrinthine pathways. He reached the extraction chamber, a horrifying scene of technological torment. Ka was strapped into a chair, her violet skin pale and drained. Tubes snaked from her body, siphoning her energy into Lordan's life support system. Lordan himself was connected to the same system, his eyes glowing with a sickly light. "You're too late, Election," Lordan rasped, his voice amplified by the chamber speakers. "The crystal's power is mine. Soon, I will be invincible." "This isn't power, Lordan," Election replied, his voice cold. "It's theft. You're stealing Ka's life, her people's heritage." "Sentimentality," Lordan sneered. "A weakness I discarded long ago." Election raised his cryo rifle, aiming for the life support system. But before he could fire, Theron appeared, blocking his path. "You will not interfere, Artisan," Theron said, his cybernetic eyes glinting. "Lordan's will is absolute." "Then you'll die defending a corpse," Election retorted, unleashing a blast of supercooled energy. The battle was fierce and brutal. Theron, enhanced by cybernetics, was a formidable opponent. He moved with superhuman speed and strength, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing energy. Election, though injured and exhausted, fought with skill and determination. He used his knowledge of cryotechnology to his advantage, freezing sections of the chamber, creating icy obstacles, and disrupting Theron's movements. He knew he couldn't defeat Theron in a straight fight. He had to be smarter, more resourceful. He noticed the tubes connecting Kaa to Lordan's life support system. An idea formed in his mind, a desperate gamble. He feinted left, then dodged right, narrowly avoiding a plasma blast. He closed the distance between him and Theron, unleashing a concentrated burst of cryo-energy at the tubes connecting Kaa to the life support system. The tubes froze solid, shattering under the pressure. The energy flow to Lordan was disrupted, causing his life support system to overload. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and the chamber filled with sparks and smoke. Theron staggered back, his systems failing. He clutched his head, writhing in pain. Election seized the opportunity, delivering a final cryoblast to Theron's power core. The cyborg collapsed, his body freezing solid in an instant. Election turned his attention to Lordan. The tyrant was convulsing in his chair, his face contorted with agony. The disrupted energy flow was tearing him apart, his body unable to handle the raw power of the soul crystal. "You can't control it," Lordan gasped, his voice barely audible. "It's not meant to be controlled," Election replied. "It's meant to be shared." He moved to Ka, releasing her from the chair. She was weak but alive, her violet skin slowly regaining its luminescence. "Election," she whispered, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We need to get out of here," he said. "This ship is going down." He took her hand, and together, they fled the extraction chamber, leaving Lordan to his fate. As they made their way through the ship, they encountered Zara and her remaining fighters. They had managed to secure an escape pod. "We're ready to go," Zara said. "But the ship's about to explode." "Then let's not keep it waiting," Election replied. They boarded the escape pod and launched it into space. As they watched from the viewport, the Ascendancy detonated in a brilliant explosion, its shattered remains scattering across the void. Back on Fralice, the Resistance fighters welcomed them as heroes. The news of Lordan's defeat spread quickly, igniting hope across the galaxy. Worlds that had once been under his tyrannical rule rose up in rebellion, overthrowing his governors and declaring their independence. Ka used the soul crystal to heal the planet, restoring its natural beauty and warmth. The ice began to melt, revealing hidden valleys and forests. Life returned to Fralice, vibrant and abundant. Election, no longer haunted by his past, found peace and purpose in his new life. He helped the Resistance fighters rebuild their communities, using his cryotechnology to create sustainable energy sources and advanced medical facilities. He and Ka grew closer, their bond forged in the fires of adversity. They shared a love for Fralice, for its people, and for the soul crystal, which they vowed to protect together. One day, as they stood overlooking the newly thawed landscape, Ka turned to Election, her eyes glowing with warmth. "What will you do now, Election?" she asked. He smiled, taking her hand. "I think I'll stay right here, with you. There's still so much to build, so much to create." He looked out at the horizon, at the dawn of a new era for Fralice, for the galaxy. He had found his place, his purpose, his love. And he knew that together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, their hearts united, their spirits strong. The master of the frozen forge had finally found his warmth, his reflection, his home.